We'll always get some emails each event requesting a exemption from our age limits. Something like roller coaster, 13-year-olds doing the 23K or 20 kilometers up mountains.
How is being around ultra people pushing beyond their limits? Like, how has that impacted you?
I'm often inspired personally by people who have just said, I want to do 100 kilometers at the Buffalo Stampede, and I'm going to dedicate and plan and prepare and really go in on this. Then I think just the camaraderie between people out on course. So often you'll be at the finish line and you'll see that there's two people that they often will say they wouldn't have got through without each other. This person they've never met before, and they'll build that little community and those connections together.
Nigel, welcome to the UltraGrowth podcast, man. I am so excited to have you on the show. How are you going this morning?
I'm going well. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so you're joining us from Bendigo, right?
That's right. Central Victoria, not the warmest place in the world, but a great place to do some running, some trail running.
So tell us about the running up there. What is it like? What's the elevation like?
Not a lot of elevation, I have to say, but really good bush running. So lots of SingleTrack around the place. Bendigo is a regional city of about 100,000 people, and it's sort of ringed by bushland. So no matter where you want to go, you can usually find some bush to get into, which is beautiful. And we've got a really nice growing running community as well. So it's always better to run with others.
So how did the boy from Bendigo get into events? Like you're, for context, a SingleTrack, running events in my view, one of the best around here in Australia. I love your events. I think the one in Bright has gone from strength to strength. I think it was even better in the new location. Like, how did you get into that caper, man? Like, take us through the journey.
Sure, yes. So grew up going through school, participated in another event, a schools event called the Energy Breakthrough, it's called, where, in short, school teams build a vehicle and then go and race it for 24 hours. And I just thought that was the best thing since sliced bread, like that whole relay concept and teamwork and all of those sort of things. And got really excited by this event. So after that, as any young person does, kind of writes to the committee and says, hey, can I come and volunteer? And bless their cotton socks, they were all like 60 years old, and they were like, what do we do with this 17-year-old? Like, what do we do? And they're like, come and do this. So I volunteered, and then sort of that led into running, and I've always had a passion for running, and just emerged over time. Volunteering led into working, led into now we have SingleTrack events. Currently we have 4 events that we organise. The one in Bright that you mentioned, Buffalo Stampede, Hounslow Classic, which is in the Blue Mountains, really tough course in the Blue Mountains, roller coaster run in the Dandenong Ranges, and the Grampians Peaks Trail 100 miler, which is top to bottom of the Grampians in Western Victoria. So that sort of evolved over time, and when opportunities came up and people said, hey, do you want to come and be a part of this event? I said yes, and that's got me to where I am.
So did you start SingleTrack on your own?
No, I didn't. It was Colin Taylor, my brother Luke Preston, and myself. So Colin is our company director. So the 3 of us got together just out of the back of COVID and took that on.
And so Colin's out of the Central Coast. How did you connect with him?
We have had a long history working together. We used to do a lot of work and a lot of sponsorship work around a series called the Weet-Bix Kids Triathlon Series, which was a long-running kids triathlon series in 17, 18 locations across the country. So we were always working together on that, and then COVID kind of put that to bed, and then post-COVID we got together and this opportunity came up to get into trail running really heavily, and we can see a lot of parallels now between what's happening in trail running now and say what was happening in Ironman triathlon 15, 20 years ago in terms of the growth and the expansion. And so we could see the parallels around that. And we just love setting the scene for people to do kind of epic things.
And that's interesting. Like, what are those parallels other than growth? Like, what are the things that you noticed about Ultra that gave you that flavor of Ironman?
Yeah, there is this age group. Shall we say it's not necessarily the young'uns necessarily. It tends to be that we are following this trend now where people want to get out in nature. They want to spend this. Often it's solitary time by themselves, running in the bush. So there's also this epic challenge, and Ironman. I think Ironman is still an epic challenge to do an Ironman triathlon, but these epic challenges of 50 kilometers, 100 kilometers, 100 miles, there's this essence of that challenge. But also, we're finding that it's really attracting that age group of 40 to 65-year-olds really heavily into trail. And also, from a commercial side of things, there is traditionally trail running was, a very organic, very rough and tumble kind of nature of events. And now we're seeing some big organizations, including the Ironman group, really move into creating a championship series and world series and those sort of things. So, which is what happened with Ironman and with Kona, 20, 30 years ago, sort of thing, when when Ironman built up that championship. You've got to run different races, you've got to qualify, you've got to get into these exclusive events. And that happened in Ironman. Now it's happening in trail.
Do you think that trails capturing a large, if you look at it from a commercial lens, like market share out of the road running community? Like, are you finding people may not run the Melbourne Marathon anymore? They might do, the roller coaster run, because I know the timing of your events, it have to be logical, right? Like, you guys are thinking about what other events are on, and maybe you're trying to compete with those events too to see what you can capture. Like, have you seen a big transition away from road running into trail?
I think the whole market has grown, number one. So when we're looking at things like Melbourne Marathon or Gold Coast Marathon or Sydney Marathon, like they're getting really big numbers now, probably biggest numbers they've ever had. So I think that the whole pie is growing. We're definitely seeing people coming across from road to trail, people who maybe pounding the pavement hasn't treated their bodies that well. But also, a lot of people will come to trail because they don't want to be on a start line with 10,000 other people. They want some of that solitary nature of running, the more friendly community aspect, a little bit more of trail. We're a very welcoming community. We're not generally as fussed about what you wear and what you look like and whether you've got the fastest carbon plated shoes. We're just happy that people want to come and challenge themselves in some epic way. So we are definitely seeing move from road to trail. But having said that, road is also booming.
It's funny you mentioned that. I think in one of your last events, the one up here in the Dandenongs, there was a dude that didn't have shoes. He was running in flip flops for real.
Yes,
Like, did you see that guy?
yes,
That
there
was
is.
wild.
Yeah, amazing, isn't it? Just think, you're doing 50 kilometers in flip flops. Like, wow, that's amazing, isn't it? And yeah, some of the things people wear, you just think, is that comfortable? And then you talk to them and they're like, no, I really love this singlet, or I really love this pair of pants or something. And you're like, okay, all right.
Yeah, like there's some really weird cats in ultra, right? It's what makes it what it is. Like, people are doing things for so many different reasons. Like, I typically find if you look at it from extremes, like you'll have the athlete to like the Goggins crew. The person with the headset on, and they're just like, they're beasting it, right? They're in their own little world in their pain cave. And then you've got like, all over there, you got the athlete, right? That's really about performance. And then everything and everyone in between, right?
Absolutely. And that is what we love about it. That's what SingleTrack loves about it. We just want to set the stage for people to take on that epic challenge. And for some people, a 12-kilometer really mountainous run with 600 meters elevation, that is an epic challenge. That's really hard for them. And then for other people, their epic challenge might be 100 miles through the Grampians. Like 100 miles, that's minimum 20 to 24 hours, maximum 52 hours. Like that can be their epic challenge. So yeah, we love putting it out there for all those different types of people that you just described.
Let's go to the beginning of your journey into the events. Like, so what was your first event that you guys threw?
Buffalo Stampede 2021. So coming out of COVID, was it 2021 or 2022? I don't know. COVID brain kind of warped things a
I
little
think
bit.
21,
So
because I
yeah,
did that event unless it was run by someone else before that. Did you acquire that event?
we did pick it up, but that was the first one that we took on. So we picked it up out of COVID. And so we created the company at about Christmas, December, and then this event was slated for March. And so we had a very rapid period of let's build an events company together between, January 1st and March. I think it was end of March, basically, that run up. So we knew a lot of things. We knew a lot of pieces. We just hadn't necessarily put that together. So yeah, our first Stampede, it had a number of years off because of COVID, and yeah, ran roughly about 600 people. I think came to that first edition of Buffalo Stampede in Bright. And for your listeners, the hero events are a Stampede Marathon, which is 42 kilometers, where athletes start at the top of Mount Buffalo, uh, right up on the top of the mountain, and then run down the mountain, and then go up three other climbs to get back to Bright. And then at that stage, we had a 75-kilometer run, which started in Bright, ran to the top of Mount Buffalo and back. We've since made that a 100-kilometer challenge because 100 kilometers is that milestone distance that people wanted to do. And so now 100 Ks is the big challenge. So yeah, the first one was a real pull it together, big hours, let's do something crazy ourselves. And certainly the feeling of success after pulling that off in 3 months was pretty amazing.
I'm gonna unpack that a little bit because there's a couple things I've always wondered. Like personally, I think my intuition would tell me that like making an event go from 77K, which I think it was, to 100 isn't actually as easy as one would think, right? Because like where do you find like how hard was that to find the extra kilometers and make the turnaround logical? Like is that a real process?
That is, and also to make it enjoyable. Like you could do lots of things with courses in terms of out and backs or loops or all those laps, but generally people don't really enjoy that from an athlete point of view. Conveniently in Mount Buffalo, there is a really large plateau on top of the mountain itself, and it's sometimes called like the island in the sky because once you get to the top of Mount Buffalo, there's now I think they run 13 kilometers out, 13 kilometers back, a really beautiful part of trail. But to make that part work, you've then got to chop some other bits out of the back end to make it all match up and everything like that. And thankfully now, as part of our team, we have guide Joe Dorf, who's our course director, and he actually lives in Bright and was able to really map out and massage that and make that work. And one of the things that we also did in that change was reduce some of the out and back. So originally with the 75, it was largely out and back. You run out one way, you come back. Now we split it on the return, and that brings in some different trails, which is really nice, and move different things around. But certainly one of the big challenges in trail running is just the distance, just the logistical distance between the start line area in Bright and then that turnaround point on the top of Mount Buffalo. Is managing that is a big challenge.
Because I was talking to Colin about it, about the run here in Colorado and the Dandenong Ranges. Like I just feel that run there could be like so many cool additional distances. Like I don't know if you got issues with council, but like have you guys considered playing with that run?
We have, yes, and we've thought a lot about doing 100 kilometers there in Mount Dandenongs, really close to where you live, your home turf, and we have mapped out a number of different variations of that. There are a few challenges, a few hurdles I think we've got to navigate, although all of them also achievable. Like there's nothing in Turkey, talking mainly with Parks Victoria, they're the main landowner in that area. There's a few different watch outs that when we spoke to them specifically about expanding it, they said, hey, you know, avoid this area. This is a really troublesome area. It's always wet, or community groups are doing this, or we're rehabilitating that. But having said that, at the moment where Roller Coaster is at, we're actually really comfortable with it being a 12, 23, 46K challenge. One issue we do have over there actually is course tampering. So local, we assume local people moving around course markers, readjusting. They reset a big section of the course last year. So it would have probably taken them 2 hours to move our trail ribbons. So when we mark a course, we put out arrows, we put out trail ribbons. They basically, in this descent, the original trail went straight on, but they basically tried to divert our runners down a really steep descent of like 30 degrees gradient or 30% gradient downhill. And we thought, wow, they've taken like a couple of hours to do this. So that's a bit of a
disgruntled roadrunners.
Yeah, I think so. We're not sure who, obviously people didn't like that. So that is a challenge with trying to run 100K in that area, is that, oh, wow, we're at the moment, the nature of that loop course is that the people who do the 46, they do the 23 twice, as you know, but your listeners probably aren't as au fait with that. But so we're just thinking, oh, wow, to manage 100 kilometers with some pretty rife course tampering might be a really big challenge out there. So we're just thinking about that. And where does it fit in the calendar? We would have to move it from its October spot at the moment. So where does that fit? There's already, including our miler, which is in the Grampians, there's already 4 other races. I think there's 5, including ours, in October, November, December. So adding another one, being number 6, whilst the pool of trail runners is decent, we don't think it's big enough to sustain, a 6th to make it viable. And we also want to be,
why wouldn't you just add the distance to the race?
Oh, to the existing sort of one?
Yeah.
Good question. I think one of the challenges around managing trail runs is the distance of the course that you have to do. The other one is the time. So at the moment, Roller Coaster fits at 46K, it fits rather neatly into one day. Once you start getting up to 100 kilometers or 100 miles, you start needing to have, particularly staff, to be honest, or volunteers, they now have to start doing 2 or 3 times the shifts, because instead of getting someone doing a 10 or a 12-hour day, now you've got a course open for 30 hours. So you actually need, doubling the course distance means you need to triple the number of shifts that you do. It's not like a one-to-one thing. And so that's a factor as well. We can't necessarily just say, oh, we'll just add on another 50K. And that's where a bit of your time, expense, commercial reality hits the road, where you say, oh, well, to do that, we would need X number more entrants to do that. Do we think with 4 or 5, 6 other 100K races, do we think we would get that many at that time of year? Probably not, unfortunately. Yeah.
These are all the interesting things that have to be considered on the back end when we're just lining up at a race, complaining and or casting our opinions that no one really considers, right? So going back to early days, so that Buffalo Stampede, so you guys took that over. Did you guys have sponsorship at that point, or were you like, what was the go?
We had some low-level sponsorship first year from Hoka and Bright Brewery and a couple of other sponsors. I think Fixed Nutrition might have come on that first year at a fairly low level, and part of that was we wanted some sponsors to demonstrate some credibility in the market. So they were on some sponsorship deals, but it was fairly low. But it was good to start. I think good to set the tone for what we wanted SingleTrack events to look like and feel like. And from there, the sponsors have grown and come over time.
So what was the commercials behind the events? Like, what are the biggest costs? And then how do you manage your cash flow? Do you is it a lot of it like you're trying to get the registrations first?
Biggest expenses will be around staff time, sometimes venue hire, medical, so first aid, particularly for people, because the courses are so long, you have to have medics out on the course at these aid stations. Grampians, the course is 100 miles, so you've got to have medics all across the course because the field spreads, so they tend to be really big. Some of the events' traffic management is a big expense and not very glamorous, and sponsors don't want to pay for traffic management, funnily enough. And then another one of your expenses will be, the participant swag. So your t-shirts, your medals, the things you give away at the actual event. So there is an upfront cost with a lot of those things and some forecasting of we're going to get this many athletes and this is how long it's going to take and this is what it's going to look like, versus then all the registrations. And then often those registrations won't come in until the last week of the event. So you're putting yourself out there in terms of event management and budget and cash flow. And so now that we have 4 events running, cash flow tends to be less lumpy. It tends to work throughout the year more.
Maybe at the road crossing, where you got the traffic management folk, you can get them to wear the gear from the sponsor.
Yeah.
That might work, man. Like that's a lot of publicity, right? Like people driving through, those guys going to be runners. Now they're inspired. They're like, oh my God, look at these excellent David Goggins types. And you got the traffic manager guy there wearing Asics. And it was like, yeah, okay. Yeah, it could work.
Yeah, that's right. Sponsor the spot. There's all those sort of ideas and things like that. And certainly a good thing about trail running is we tend to have much fewer road crossings than obviously road races and those sort of things. That's part of the appeal of it. But where you do interact with roads, you do have to have those spots.
So when you got into that particular event, like, was there anything that like you guys didn't really think of or account for, or were you guys pretty covered from your history and your experience?
There was always okay, we're going to do this. We're going to send people out there. And I was very relieved. I remember getting through the 10-kilometer event, which we run on the Friday night. So it's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday program. We start with a twilight race on the Friday night. I just felt very relieved when the runners started coming back to the finish. We send them off and we're just like, gosh,
You're like a parent.
I hope the course is marked. Like, I hope the signage is all right. I hope the medics are in place. I hope the timing works. And yeah, I just distinctly remember this sense of relief going, oh, well, if they're coming back, like this whole concept has kind of worked. This is okay. This is going to be all right. So that was a relief moment. I think there was occasionally through the lead up a few processes of, oh, we need to do that, or oh, the traffic management looks like that many hours, when you're suddenly doing a what at that stage I think was an 18-hour cutoff. You're like, oh, we need traffic management out there for 18 hours. Like, you can't just look after the fast people and let the stragglers kind of deal with themselves. That's a bit of a thing. Certainly now fire risk is much greater than it was sort of previously, and that was probably when we used to be involved with triathlon, like Weet-Bix Kids Triathlon or Ironman, that sort of thing. Fire risk was not such a big concern, but now once you go into trail running, you suddenly have to think, oh, what are the weather conditions out there? Where are the fire risks happening? Those sort of things. What we had, not so much first year with Buffalo, but the second year was part of our race goes through an active pine plantation in Bright, in the high country. And so, as is their right, the owners of the pine plantation just decided to log an entire section of what was our course. And so that was a bit of a, oh dear moment, in that this entire route that we had been planning and considering and thinking about for a really long time, now we have to divert all of our runners off that ridge because they've
Became an
got active.
obstacle.
Yeah,
Became an obstacle course overnight.
yeah, a little bit cross Spartan, maybe. No,
Yeah.
yeah. So that was a big. Oh boy, okay, we're going this way with that now. Like, yeah, we've got to respond to that, and that's also kind of nice from a organic point of view of going. Okay, well, we can't do that course anymore. We have to find a new course, and there was those moments where you're just thinking, oh, is this even going to work? Like, is this going to be any good for the participants going down this different route? Um, have we kind of killed the notion of the whole event because we can't run that ridge anymore? And thankfully, the bush area that is in, there's heaps of different options. So that was okay.
I would imagine like I always think like you guys marking 100 miler like that's in itself an epic event, right? Like I guess that's broken down by people. It's not one person
Mm,
doing
yes,
the whole course, but you also have to do a course check, which would mean like for instance in the Grampians, you have to know what's happening on that 100 miler for sure, right? The day or two before the race.
absolutely. Yes. So we have teams of people who go out with the ribbons, with the arrows, with the markers. Generally, we say it takes about half an hour a kilometre to mark. So you just multiply that out. That seems pretty consistent. So, if you're doing a 10-kilometre course, even just a 10-kilometre course, that's 5 hours worth of walking that requires people to do. And that's not that they're slow. It's just that half of the trails are straight up or straight down, or you're literally getting ribbons and tying them to trees or pegging them in the ground. And so you multiply that by a miler and that starts to get a lot. And you realize, oh, one person can't do all of that. So we have roughly three teams that'll do most of the miler. Go out, check it all before the race as well with a forward runner, an advanced bit of an advanced party. And then post race, the less exciting, less glamorous thing is going out and pulling back in all the markers, because that is a really important part of treating the environment well and treating the landscape well, and the making sure that everything is removed, so the event almost never happened. So
In the Grampians, are there entry points? Or like someone literally has okay, so there are entry points and right, so you don't have to start from the beginning to do the whole right. Okay, well that makes it
there's a number of aid stations on the course itself. I think there's 13. Yes, 13 come to mind. That includes start and finish. And so most of those points will give you different access points. They're roughly every 10 to 13 miles on the course. So, yeah, quite a few different spots. So, yeah, we will do a bit of a logistical process of pick up someone here, drop them off there, drop off there, pick up there, those sort of things. So, yeah, it's not a small part of the process. And whilst it's interesting when you think, oh, that trail's really obvious to me, but you have to assume that someone's never been there before. They're running, they're in the moment, they're in the flow, they're not familiar with the area. You have to make it as obvious as it can be that this is the way you want them to go.
yeah, if someone's gonna get lost, it's me. So, I was just on that question. Like, have you had any epic situations, like like where someone got lost epically?
We had a shocker earlier this year at Buffalo Stampede, and it still pains me to think about this one, but we had run the 100-kilometer the day before on the Saturday, and then on the Sunday we do the marathon that I talked about earlier,
I ran that one.
the 42-kilometer, and there was one little course change that needed to happen, some arrows that needed to be removed from the 100K to the 42K, and we had some volunteers that we tried to assign to be, we assigned to be there, and then we had that moment like right as the race was starting, and my volunteer coordinator calls and is like, oh, those volunteers, they haven't shown up for, whatever reason in the world. and then you're thinking, oh, that means that section of the course won't be right. So we had this moment where our top six athletes, our top six, elite athletes beat the new crew member that we'd sent there. We're like, Simon, run to this point. You've got to run, leg it, basically, out to this point and pull down these arrows. Otherwise, they're going to be running to the end of Mount Buffalo. Like, they're just going to keep following the 100-kilometer course. And this is going to be really bad. So he got there. He missed the first six, as I said, and then basically was able to pull down all the signs and just point people back onto the road. And that was one where you just unpack and you think, oh, if we'd done this, if we'd done that, that wouldn't have happened. And that one still pains me.
That dude that won the marathon, I think it was like 3 hours something. Did he get lost?
He didn't. He was okay, but the guy who ran second, he did. He did get lost. So he ran another 3.5 kilometers because they diverted off on this path on the top of Mount Buffalo, ended up realizing, hang on a minute, this is not what it said on the tin, and then did an extra 3.5K loop back. And then we caught up with them and said, take this way and get back on. So the person who ran second ran 45 kilometers, not 42, and still came second. So he really knuckled down and went for it, whereas the other 5 just said, oh, look, that's not my day. I'm just going to pull out. It's a real mental shift. So, yeah, but that was one of those things where you think you put all these plans in places, and I often think events are not necessarily complicated beasts. They're just 1,000 things you've got to do. And you can sit back and go, oh, we got 999 of them right, except for that one thing. And that one thing had a major consequence for the elite of that race, which I was also really disappointed about because we actually had a really stacked field for that race. So it would have been really interesting to see how that competition unfolded.
It's interesting my first roller coaster run when I actually wasn't living up here. I happened to just end up buying the house across the street from where it starts, which is pretty cool. The first year, a few of us got lost, or we took a wrong turn. And I think I was with Tom. Was it Tom? The really fast young, yeah. And he ended up winning it anyway. We went an extra 2.5 kilometers heading the wrong way, and he came back and shuffled his way as he does into first. And it was interesting, his attitude, because how you respond to getting lost is interesting, right? Like, I was tired and kind of grumpy about it, but the way that he kind of took it in his stride, you know what I mean? I think that's the hallmark of a champion, right? Like, he was just like, yep, no worries, it's happened. And he just got himself back up to where he was. And ultimately, I think he won, or he got second that year. Talking about the elite runners, Nigel, shift the lens. Like, how is the elite running side evolved and changed? And are these people able to make a living yet? Or are they still like working at a cafe and they've got to, like, what's that look like?
There are very few in Australia pro trail athletes. Lucy Bartholomew's probably the one that comes to mind as one of the few. Most are still working. Most, even if they have a sponsorship of some sort from a shoe company or an apparel company, they wouldn't be earning enough to earn a living wage. Certainly in the US and in Europe, there is more of an established pro trail running market, but the market there is also much bigger. So a lot of them are still working cafe, but they might be doing some coaching now. So trail run coaching is really expanding, and that's obviously a business that they can work in around other thing they can do. But at the moment, it is mostly, I would say, still amateurized sport, and that's a little bit similar to the parallels of Ironman triathlon of 20, 30 years ago before, like previously there was no professional triathletes sort of thing, and now fast forward now, it's not uncommon for you to be like, oh, that person just dedicates themselves to training. That's their job.
When you reflect on Ironman, like what were the mechanics behind how Ironman evolved to the point where that level of monetization was possible for events companies and athletes? Like, what's the trigger point generally?
Live stream or broadcast is a really key thing. So being able to get it out, get the sport out to more eyeballs, tell people stories. And when I was in my teens, Sunday afternoons, there used to be a triathlon broadcast on Channel 10 back in the day, live streamed from the Gold Coast or wherever. And you just think, wow, that's a massive way of getting eyeballs out there and communicating and those sort of things. And that is starting to be where trail running is in terms of the live stream. There was, for example, a big race last weekend, Western States Endurance Run in the US, live streamed on YouTube, live tracking for all the athletes as well. And so that level of exposure just rocket fuels the audience, and then by extension, what sponsors want to get involved in. So I think if we look back to triathlon, it was that TV broadcast that really helped push and elevate. And then suddenly you've got the shoe brands, you've got the swim brands, you've got the bike brands, and it is kind of good in triathlon. You've got three different markets you can tap into. And they're all thinking, oh, well, we'll get behind that. And then your lifestyle brands and your other drink brands or associated brands think, well, we want to be associated with this big sport now. So I think that's the next frontier, and we're not doing it brilliantly in Australia. We're not quite there yet, but that's what I can see coming in the next 5 years is a much better live stream broadcast capabilities of races. It's Having said that, it's much more difficult to live stream broadcast a trail run in the bush than it is to do a closed circuit triathlon event, which might only cover a few kilometers, and you've got a few fixed points, and your swim's obviously in one place, your bike ride, you can do motos really easy, and then a run usually uses part of the ride course. So all of those things are different challenges, but I see that is probably the one piece that really worked. Trail runners now are really built around Instagram and that visual nature of someone doing an epic run in the wild, and so people can really capitalize on that in lieu of live streams. That social media presence, building up their brand, their personal brands on Instagram in particular, really seems to be what's helping fuel the sponsors and fuel the sponsors' interest.
In terms of live stream, is that athlete led, meaning that they would have to wear the cameras, or is there cameras on a trail? Like, how does that work?
It's about a not generally on the athlete. It tends to be people on mountain bikes or literally running around the athletes to do that. So we've talked with a number of the live stream organizations. We're just not quite there financially yet to do that. But for example, with one of the race series in Europe, they have a 40-person production team that is not involved with the event production, is just involved with the live stream production. So that's people running around with GoPros, following the athletes, usually the top 5 to 10 men and women, with a few fixed point camera spots as well in the aid stations, moving around. So 40 people, that's quite a lot of people and quite a lot of gear to haul around.
In terms of the Australian elite athlete doing well on a global stage, like I would imagine, like any sport, athletes would probably need to get out of Australia, maybe younger, to compete, maybe living in Europe or Western states that's close to where I grew up in Auburn or whatever. Like, are we seeing that happening yet? Like, are we seeing Australians going overseas and getting to where I mean, our elevation is good, but our trails are not as technical as Europe, right? And in America, I think it's more about open trail. There's a single trail there, but again, I think like our elevation, we have elevation, but we just don't have, I guess, the scale of competition and all that stuff that will drive the athlete to get really good young. Like, do we know if we have athletes that are actually leaving Australia young and spending time overseas?
Not that I've heard of so much in trail. I don't think quite the market has matured or the scene has matured so much. Having said that, I think as well, probably in the next 5 years, some athletes traveling to the States, maybe on a college like track sponsorship, and then also adding in, well, I'm going to run track here, but I'm also going to do trail. And there is a young lady, Paige Penrose, who's just finished up doing a college stint, and she was a mix. She was, she runs track, she runs road, she runs trail, and we are starting to see that emerging. But Paige is probably the only athlete I've probably heard of who's been like, no, I'm gonna make a go of this. I'm gonna do this. Simone Brick is another athlete. She's sponsored by Solomon, and she's still mainly Melbourne based, but will travel overseas for most of the European summer as well. But I think we're just not quite there yet. But having said that, I think if I was in my rewind, if we go back to our younger selves, I think if we were in our younger teenage years, it'd be something you'd start to look at thinking, well, I've got to go to where the better trails are. And they're either in the States or they're either in Europe compared to what we have here in Australia. In terms of that really high elevation, as you said, and the technicality, we just don't quite have that here. Having said that, Grampians, whilst doesn't have elevation, is very technical. And so that's probably on par in terms of the technicality. It's just not super high.
And someone was saying that, I don't know if it was the Grampians, it reminded him of Leadville. Uh, uh, but it's interesting. Like, I think with that, you know, athletes that I see out there, they're getting younger too, right? Like, I was at a trail run race in Wilson's Prom, and my wife did the shorter distance in a different track, and my kids ran it. And I think this 9-year-old girl took like second in the 10K. She was flying, flying. Uh, are you seeing younger kids line up?
We are. We'll always get some emails each event requesting a exemption from our age limits. They'll be like, oh, I've got this 13-year-old though, and he's super. And, particularly something like roller coaster, they want to do the 23. We won't let them do the 46, although they'd always write and ask. So, yeah, 13-year-olds doing the 23K or 20 kilometers up mountains, that other people are really finding really difficult. But I think also broadly, the age is getting younger as well. So what's typically been the domain of the 40 to 60-year-olds is now becoming the 20-something, the 30-something.
What's your view on age, and like, how do you guys manage that? Like, are you guys pretty hard and fast on your rules of like, 16 or 18 or?
We're generally really hard and fast on it, but we will have a look at some athletes in particular, particularly have a conversation with their parents, or sometimes have a look at some of their Strava files, and if sometimes they've got a good case, we'll let them in. Other times we'll say, look, we want to put this and this in place to make sure that you're all right out there. Be it run with a parent. Usually it's running with a parent or a couple of parents if they can keep up, or, notify our aid station and our medical team that these people are on course and we need to give them a little bit more attention. Having said that, they tend to be up for the challenge, so they're not so bad. But at some races, we'll actually just say, no, the terrain is too difficult. This is too technical. Just wait some more years, just go and do a few more other either easier trail runs or less less rocky runs or those sort of things. The races will still be there. Hopefully, the races will still be there when you're 16 or when you're 18. And so we're happy to turn some people away depending on the course as well.
Insurance would be an issue too, right? Like you got to think about those things, right? Liabilities and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking, well, what's the point of the run? The point is to give people an epic experience in amazing scenery. Will that still be there in 3 years or 6 years' time when they're a bit older and a bit more experienced and those sort of things? Yes, it probably will be, all things going well. And I think people will often plan for the worst, and we often see this with our athletes. They think, oh, I don't need to carry a snake bandage. I never need to use this thing. Or why do I have to carry a space blanket? And I never need to use this. But if they roll their ankle or if things go wrong, that's when things are really tested. And particularly then if let's say they're 12 or 13-year-old or 9, I think you said that child was, like how is that child going to respond when things aren't going well, when they've rolled their ankle or they've been bitten by a snake or they've cut their hand open or something like that? And that's where you think, oh, well, the whole duty of care and response becomes a very different picture for you in the wilderness as an event organizer. And from an insurance point of view and from a risk point of view, to say, yep, we okayed this 9-year-old to run this course or this 13-year-old. And in the cold light of day, was that a good idea or not? Is just something you've got to do. So it is hard being that person who's saying, no, we don't think that's okay because of X, Y, Z. And I know a lot of parents and particularly kids will be like, oh, well, I wrote to this race and they let me in. And I'm like, well, that's okay. That's that race's decision. This is our race's decision. And this is what we want to do. So.
No, understood. And as we start to land the plane, I've got a final question around, you're obviously around a lot of inspiring stories and scenarios as a race director, Nigel. Like, how is being around ultra and seeing and experiencing, I suppose, people pushing beyond their limits, like how has that impacted you?
It really fills your cup seeing people going and setting themselves some sort of challenge, which it might be winning, but often it's not actually winning. It's just completing the course. The race and the challenge is against the course for them. And for me personally, seeing that, saying, well, we don't have to always be the best. Sometimes whatever our measure of success is what we're aiming for. And sometimes that's completing the course in 12 hours, sometimes it's 24 hours, sometimes it's 52 hours. So I'm often inspired personally by people who have just said, I want to do 100 kilometers at the Buffalo Stampede, and I'm going to dedicate and plan and prepare and really go in on this. And sometimes they'll do it in flip-flops as well, which is not recommended, but that's what they do. And you think, wow, this has become a really big personal achievement for them. It's not about winning. It's not about anything else. It's about literally ticking off that moment. And the first year that I was race director for the 75K at the Buffalo Stampede, I remember seeing people finish and just thinking, oh, I've got to do something like this. I want to do an epic challenge, for myself to do that. So that's really inspiring from an athlete point of view. I admire their patience. These runners are out there for 12, 24, sometimes 50 hours. They can't sprint off. They need to pace themselves. So their patience is really impressive about how they play the long game. For me and the running that I tend to do, which is normally in the 20 to 30K range, I'm often more impulsive. I'm reactive. And so their patience and their ability not to panic when things aren't going the best, to adjust things over time is really impressive. I'm really admire that sense of calmness, and I try to adopt some of that into my work as well that I see. And then I think just the camaraderie that you see for people between people out on course. So often you'll be at the finish line and you'll see that there's two people, two guys or guys and girls or women have been on the course, and they've not said hello to each other ever before in their lives. And then suddenly they've run this trail run together and suddenly had a great conversation, and together they've got themselves through the run, this challenge together. And so that's something else I really admire from runners, is that they're able to respond and react on the go while they're doing this challenge and suddenly make some friends and work together. And, that can be impressive, that they often will say they wouldn't have got through without each other. This person they've never met before, suddenly they've got a trail buddy and they'll build that little community and those connections together. So there are a few things that I observe and notice with our trail athletes.
Yeah, I loved seeing you run that. I think you did roller coaster run.
Yes.
You actually had a crack. That was good to see.
Yeah, it was beautiful to get out on course as well and to see, this is what the course looks like. Oh, the course markings are all in place. That's good. The volunteers are there. The road traffic management's working. Just do a bit of be part of the event. And that's one thing that we love with SingleTrack, is that we do compete in events ourselves. When we are not organizing things, we like to jump in and participate. And gives us that. We'd like to think that gives us that perspective as well. We can see the participant point of view as well, because it is for the athletes. It's not, we don't run this business for ourselves. We run it so that other people can enjoy the challenges.
Where can people learn about SingleTrack, the events and everything that you guys are doing?
Yeah. If you Google SingleTrack events, you might see a whole bunch of different things, but singletrack.com.au is our website. So look those up. We are very active on Instagram and particularly Facebook as well. Just SingleTrack events, trail running, and they're the best places.
And we will have all of that in the show notes. So we will have more details for the listeners and viewers. Nigel, want to thank you for your time. Really, really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your insight and your wisdom and your experience, man. Thanks.
Thanks so much for having me. Hope to see you on the trail soon.